Wow, 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 wow. 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 Wow, 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 wow. Wow, wow. Bah, 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 bah. Ho, 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 ho. Ho, ho, ho. The Man with No Name was one I was pretty excited that got picked. These are films that have been on my watch list for a long time. While I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, it was on TV and a super long time ago, so I'm pretty excited to revisit it. A Fistful of Dollars, or The Return of Yojimbo, is a film starring Clint Eastwood, directed by Sergio Leone, about a lone gunman coming into a town caught up in the mix of two rival families. The gunman wants to play the families to enrich himself, and yeah, it's the exact same story as Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo from 1961 that I covered in last year's 31 for 31. A film I loved, by the way. The film is actually so close that Kurosawa and his collaborator actually sued the film and won, stating that A Fistful of Dollars made him more money than Yojimbo ever did. I'm actually happy that I found that out going into this film because it didn't allow me to be very distracted by it. Sure, I was constantly thinking, yep, this is Yojimbo, but if I hadn't known that like ahead of time going into this, I probably would have been pretty frustrated by just being able to predict the whole plot and what was going on, just being like, hey, wait a minute, this is just Yojimbo. Like, sure, you can copy my homework, but don't make it too obvious. Replace the samurai with gunslingers and bam, Fistful of Dollars. Honestly, outside of that, I really did enjoy the film. The story of Yojimbo is just inherently a fun one, and while it's a blatant copy, it does do justice in fully developing the characters, the rivalry, and Clint Eastwood's screen presence does add a certain amount of charisma to his character. Mix that with Ennio Morricone's amazing score and Leone's directorial style, and the film does kind of become its own thing, even if it has the same skeleton. I love the visualization of the opening credits, the gritty and dirty atmosphere of the West. Everything just feels like it's covered in grime. The way the camera moves, zooms, and its close-ups just adds a healthy dose of flavor to the visual language of the film. However, I absolutely hated the day-to-night scenes in this film. It's clear they're just shooting in the daytime and adding some kind of film that looks more like sunglasses than the actual night. It was really goofy. There's also some moments where the characters are out of focus, but outside of that, I just love the film visually. From here on out, I'm not going to compare the film to Yojimbo at all, but kind of just on its own merit. I will say I like Yojimbo more, but let's move on. Another thing that's noticeable right away is the dubbing. Apparently this film was shot entirely silently and completely dubbed over, and it sounds like it. The dubbing is off, some performances don't match the words spoken, but also the tone of the performance visually as well. A lot of the Foley sound effects feel artificial, which did lead to a couple of distracting moments for me. However, you do kind of get used to it as time goes on, until this little f***er shows up. That's just downright funny bad. The dubbing kind of reminds me of like Giallo dubbing, if that makes any sense. Still though, I just found myself into this film. Like, yeah, again, we're plagiarized, but an inherently gripping story that leads to a lot of fun moments, and our main character is just fun to watch. Not to mention, but he's also kind of like a superhero and how he just like beats everybody. The performances, despite some of the dubbing, is pretty solid across the board. The main villain, Razor Ramon, just kind of is like a loose cannon villain that presents danger at any time he's on screen. The film can juggle the dark grit with some comical moments really well, and in terms of pacing, this film just flew by for me. Now, this is the shortest film of the trilogy, but it really did just go by for me. While there's not a real origin of blood when people get shot, the action set pieces are still a lot of fun, and there's some really cool stylistic choices when it comes down to how they show the gunslinging. There's just a vibe that this movie gives off that just feels fresh and unique, despite it being from the 60s and being a genre that, while fun, can be rather generic. I mean, spaghetti westerns, that is. This is just one that has its own flavor, and you can see that in the rest of the trilogy kind of get carried over. For me, Fistful of Dollars is an 8 out of 10. I enjoyed it a lot, despite basically already seeing the film in samurai form, but it was a good western that's a lot of fun, so it's an 8 out of 10. For a Few Dollars More from 1965 is the next film in the Dollars trilogy, this time following around Clint Eastwood's character named Monaco. Technically, I think all three films, Clint Eastwood's character is a different character, but they all basically are the same character. They even wear the same clothes, but I do think they're technically different characters. Well, this time he's a bounty hunter trying to catch El Indio when he comes across another bounty hunter played by Lee Van Cleef. I'm not sure if this one is a copy of another film or not, but I really enjoyed this one. Like I said, I think Clint Eastwood's characters in these movies are kind of like Mad Max, where it's not really a continuity order line story, but more of a lone hero that's in these different situations. You could argue that it's the same character, but it's kind of tough when, even though the different iterations look the same and act the same and dress the same, but aren't called the same. So I don't know. I personally just take them as different characters, and these are all unrelated stories, but that's just my opinion. Now, with that out of the way though, I really just dug the story here. It is just storytelling at its finest. Indio is a crazy villain that is as smart as he is dangerous. The film holds no punches back on that. Pretty much once he's broken out of prison, you see how ruthless he can be. People fear him, which is why his bounty is so high, and this leads to our main plot where Clint Eastwood's character and Lee Van Cleef's character team up to take him down. The scene where the two first meet up is just honestly a great scene. It's a lot of fun, but also shows the talents of each while also showing in a way the respect they have for each other. The two have great on-screen chemistry together. They butt heads, but they also have a natural flow and rhythm to them. The characters bouncing off each other can just add humor into the story, a story that's rather darker than the first film and is more tonally complex, balancing that shifting through the dark and grit and humor really well, kind of like the first film, but kind of amplified here. That humor never cheapens the tension though throughout the film. Again, the film has some great opening credits, and once again Ennio Morricone knocks the score out of the ballpark here. Leone's visual style and directorial style saturates the film as well, bringing all the positives I've said about the first film. That also kind of brings the negatives with it as well. Again, there's some scenes where characters are out of focus, the film is dubbed over again, and pretty much my same complaints kind of apply here as well, except the film doesn't have an atrocious performance like the little boy from A Fistful of Dollars. While all those negatives are still here, the film gains, in my opinion, originality in its story, and the violence that does feel more gruesome and hard-hitting. There's a lot more blood here, and there's a lot more makeup that looks really good. However, what really steals the show is Lee Van Cleef. He is amazing here. His character gets probably the most backstory and has the most closure as well, just, not getting into spoilers of it. The film just doesn't need to spoon-feed you exposition. There's a scene towards the end where Van Cleef is showing a lot of emotion and pain while showing as little of it as possible physically. You can literally see it all in his eyes and slight facial tweaks that just really hit me. I was just blown away with his performance in a way where he kind of just outshined Eastwood here. Not saying Eastwood was a slouch either. They gave the man with no name a lot to work with in this film, giving him more dialogue but also a character to bounce off of. This entry being about 30 minutes longer, it honestly felt shorter to me than the first film. We did watch A Fistful of Dollars and A Few Dollars More back to back. Didn't have enough time to get that GBU in, and while the films can kind of blend together due to their almost same cast and tone and style of movie, I just felt like this film whizzed by a lot quicker. Both films are pretty much close in how I would rank them, but I did like For a Few Dollars more so than A Fistful of Dollars, which is why I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. This is one that could go up on a second viewing, but I'll definitely be rewatching this one again. Now on to the final film in Sergio Leone's The Man with No Name trilogy, or Dollars trilogy, whatever you want to call it, but The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly. This being the only film in the series or trilogy that I was familiar with since I had watched it on TV a while ago. I was pretty sure I watched this one on cable back in the day, but I'm not sure how much of it was edited out or anything like that. I don't even know if I caught it from the beginning, because the beginning felt kind of unfamiliar, but there was a lot of scenes that I remembered, and like I said, some that I really didn't. So the film is about the good Blondie, played by Clint Eastwood, the bad Angel Eyes, played by Lee Van Cleef, and Tuco, played by Eli Wallach, who is, Blondie and Tuco have a partnership where Tuco has a bounty. Blondie brings him in and saves him before execution. Angel Eyes, on the other hand, is looking for lost or, maybe stolen treasure. Well, when Blondie turns on Tuco and Tuco gets back at him, both men find themselves with one half of the secret location of the stolen treasure. Despite wanting to kill each other, they do team up when they cross paths with Angel Eyes. The film has a very slow and patient approach to the story, this being nearly 3 hours long. It gives itself time to let you live with the characters, the main plot not really developing till over an hour into the film's runtime. It gives you time to learn about Duccio, Blondie, and Angel Eyes, so you can almost be in a position to predict their next movement, which is kind of a key focus on how they try to stay one step ahead of each other, while each giving a great performance to back it up. All three leads here are outstanding, but I gotta give props to Eli Wallach, who I think gave the best performance of the entire trilogy. He was great. Now, I do want to talk about something before we continue, and that is the score. This is so far my favorite score from a film I've ever heard. I've listened to the score of this film for years, and I was way more familiar with it than the actual movie. Ennio Morricone really knocked out of the park with this trilogy, but here there's something he does with the good and the bad, the ugly, that just sparks so much emotion in its music. Every song fits the scenes regardless of how often they play the same song. Some scenes are greatly enhanced by the score, but the two ending pieces are some of the best synchronized pieces of music and film I've ever seen in history, in my opinion. That being the Ecstasy of Gold into the trio. The way the film is cut to the music, adding to the emotional weight of the scenes, is literally just perfection. It's really one of those things where it's like, this is some of the best that cinema has to offer in terms of just melding together so well with so many different art forms. With that being said though, I do have some issues with the film. Most of the previous issues I had with the trilogy are also present here, from bad dubbing to some noticeable Foley, spiked audio, and some scenes are out of focus. But unlike the other two films, I could definitely feel the runtime here. Now, from my understanding, this cut is actually an extended cut that has become the new normal cut, and honestly, I would have rather have seen a cut down version, as there are scenes in the film that could have been completely cut out of the film and wouldn't have made any difference to the story whatsoever. The big scene that kind of comes to mind for me is like the Civil War scene. It just didn't add much to the film at all, but there's also moments here and there where I just wish the film was made a little bit tighter. Personally, in that Civil War scene, just felt like it did nothing to add to either Blondie or Duccio's character. It didn't really add very much and to progress their story, and it just felt like it was kind of here for spectacle, and it was the scene that really kind of took me out of the experience and to me really broke up the pacing. One thing that really surprised me though was the humor in the film. There's some genuinely funny moments, and the film can really balance that tone of gritty West and humor really well. Now, this isn't like a comedy and there's not like a ton of humor, but when it's here it really works. And the other two films also was able to kind of balance that tone really well, but I found like some of the comedy moments here in this film were much funnier than the previous two films. Something I feel like I should mention is just Clint Eastwood. I've given a lot of credit to other actors and their performances over Eastwood, and while I did find their performances to be outstanding, Clint Eastwood has literally been the rock and foundation of this entire trilogy. He's iconic, and that carries over every film, even if he's kind of the co-star in a way, where his co-stars are just eating up the scenes. Eastwood has been not only consistent in all of his performances, but also consistent with his character, despite technically being different characters. It adds to this almost Wild West folklore aspect of these films to help elevate them even more, as if they needed any help in the first place being elevated. I personally love the look of this film, despite having some focal issues. There's just so many visually striking scenes, but on top of that, you have so many choices in how the camera is framed or how characters are blocked that turns the cinematography into another piece of language for storytelling here. That definitely coming to a pinnacle in the final act of the film. It also says so much without the characters having to say anything at all. And honestly, that ending act of the film, in my opinion, it really is just about as good as film gets. It does everything perfectly. All the elements come together in harmony, and it's just amazing. With that being said though, I do look back on the entire trilogy, and I personally think I like For a Few Dollars More a little bit more than The Good and the Bad, the Ugly. There's just so much here though I do love and really like. I just wish it was a bit tighter, and I'm going to give this one an 8.5 out of 10. I am curious to see if I can find like that original like shorter cut to see how that one would work for me, but yeah, I think I'm at an 8.5 out of 10. So yeah, my favorite of this set was For a Few Dollars More, with The Good and the Bad, the Ugly, and A Fistful of Dollars rounding it out. This is just such a badass trilogy. All these films I'd highly recommend. This is easily one of my favorite westerns out there. There's just something about A Few Dollars More. I feel like I may have said at some point, I feel like I may have said that title a little bit wrong. For some reason, I keep wanting to like mess it up, like For a Few Dollars More or A Few More Dollars, or you know what I mean? I keep like jumbling around the words. Honestly, that film though might go up to a 9 out of 10 on a second watch. It just does everything I want personally from a western, so I'm happy to finally cross these ones off my list. Also, I know I said how good the music is in these films, but I honestly can't stress enough how much I loved those scores. But yeah, alright, bye!